Today we are going to continue our work with completing the square, looking at completing the square part 2. Okay, so we are going to start off with this one, and if you'll notice, I rearranged it so it would look sort of like some of the ones you guys might see in Delta Math. Now remember I told you yesterday in the last video that the first thing you need to do when you come across this kind of problem is rearrange it so that it's in the correct order. I need my x squared term first, and then x to the first, and then no x. I want it to be in descending order. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And now I'm ready to do my steps, but I have to have it in the correct order so that I can find the things that I need. Okay, so the first thing, remember, is to move the c, move the constant term to the other side of the equals. So I'm going to do that. Positive 10, negative 10 are opposites. They cancel out. And I'm going to put a blank there. And on this side, I'm going to have negative 10, and I'm going to put a blank there as well. Okay, so there's step 1. I have moved my constant term, and I've put my blanks in there. All right, now let's see if we can figure out what goes in the blank. So remember, for step 2, I'm going to take half of b. Well, in this question, what is b? b is negative 2. b is the coefficient on the x to the first term. So I'm going to take half of negative 2, which is negative 1, and then I'm going to square it. And again, like I told you before, y'all be real careful with those negative numbers. Make sure you put them in parentheses before you do the exponent. All right, and I got 1, which is a positive number. That's why I already have the plus, and I'm going to fill that into the blanks. Okay, so there's step 2. All right, now let's see if we can simplify this. So I'm going to factor this like a perfect square trinomial. So you remember, in the parentheses, I'm going to have this variable with no exponent. All right, it's just x to the first, not x to the second. And then 1/2 b is going to go right here. I already did 1/2 b. Here it is over here, negative 1. And on the right-hand side, negative 10 plus 1, negative 9. Okay, so there's step 3. I solved it I factored it rather like a perfect square trinomial. All right, and now I'm going to solve it using the square root method. So when we do the square root method, we take the square root of both sides because the squared thing is already isolated. Squared and square root are opposites. They cancel each other out. Oh, almost forgot my plus and minus. So when I do the square root of negative 9, I need to bring down my plus and minus because remember, this kind has 2 answers. All right, square root of 9 is 3, but this is the square root of negative 9. So instead of just putting regular 3, I'm going to put 3i. Remember, that negative inside the square root gives me an imaginary. Okay, and I noticed on the quiz, some of you guys left off your plus and minus. Be real careful about that. When my original highest exponent is 2, I need to have 2 answers. So I need the plus and minus so I can get those 2 answers. All right, and now I'm going to get the x by itself. So I'll add 1 to both sides. So x equals 1, right? I'm going to put my real part first, plus and minus the square root of 3. So I do, in fact, have 2 answers here. I'm sorry, not square root of 3, 3i. 1 plus 3i is my first answer, and 1 minus 3i is my second answer. Okay, so now let me move my 4 down there. All right, that's where I solved it using my square root method. Okay, let's look at the questions you guys are going to be asked in Delta Math. We practiced this yesterday. So the first one, if using the method of completing the square to solve the quadratic equation, which number would I have to add in order to complete the square? Okay, so look back at our work. What number did we add on both sides? That's the number that Delta Math is looking for here. And if you look at the number we put in the blank, that number was 1. So the answer to this question is 1. That is the number that we're going to add to both sides. All right, let's look at this one. The intermediate step. You remember we talked about this yesterday. Intermediate means in between. All right, and let's look back at our work. What is the equation that Delta Math is looking for? Well, inside the parentheses, I have x minus 1, and I have that after I simplified it, I have it equal to -9. That's that in-between step. So it's basically asking you when you did the perfect square trinomial part, what did you get? And that is what it's looking for. So that in-between step there. All right, let's try another one. So in this one, I immediately noticed something different. I have a number, I have a coefficient on my x squared here. Well, in order for the factoring right here to work, the perfect square trinomial part, I need for this coefficient to be a 1. So what I'm going to do and what you're going to need to do is divide everything by that coefficient, whatever it is. Now, the ones we're going to focus on, that coefficient will go in evenly, but that's not always true. You can work with fractions, especially because you have those calculators, but the ones we're going to focus on, because completing the square is new, we're going to focus on ones that turn out to be whole numbers. Just be aware that they won't always. So I'm going to have x squared minus 6 divided by 3 is 2. And then -12 divided by 3 is -4, which is not a whole number, it's an integer, but still no fraction, no decimal. Okay, so now I'm ready to do step 1, which is to move the c term to the other side. Well, in this case, it's already there. So the only thing I need to do is go back and put in my blanks. So x squared minus 2x plus blank equals -4 plus blank. Okay, I already had C on the other side. I just had to add the blanks. Okay, now let's figure out what goes in the blanks. So I'm going to take half of B. B, again, is the coefficient on X. So 1/2 of -2 is -1. And then I'm going to square it. It's a two-step process to figure out what number goes in those blanks. Okay, now that was step 2. And just like last time, I now want to factor it like a perfect square trinomial. So what is going to go inside the parentheses? Well, it's going to be that variable without the squared, and then 1/2 b, which is -1. And on the right-hand side, -4 plus 1 is -3. Okay, so now I'm going to move my 3 down here. I have factored that like a perfect square trinomial. I am ready to do the square root method. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides, remembering to write plus and minus. On the right-hand side, squared and square root are opposites. They cancel each other out. And on the right-hand side, remember to bring down the plus and minus. Okay, 3 is not a perfect square number. 3 is prime, so I can't do a factor tree. So there's nothing I can do with the 3 itself, but the negative I can. What will that negative become? The negative is going to become an I. And it's going to go on the outside of the square root. Remember, the square root of -1 is I, and I is outside the square root. It doesn't stay on the inside. All right, now I need to get x by itself. So I'll add 1 to both sides. All right, and just like before, I'm going to put the real part first and then the imaginary part. And also, just like before, I do have two answers here. 1 plus I squared root of 3 is one answer, and 1 minus I squared root of 3 is the other answer. So again, when my highest exponent is 2, I'm going to have two answers, and I do 1, 2. So let me move my little 4 down here. That's where I was solving using the square root method. Okay, so now which number did I have to add to complete the square? All right, go back and look. What number did we put in the blank? Just like before, that was 1. So the number that Delta Math is going to be looking for here is 1. All right, and the equation in this intermediate step, x plus a squared equals b. So I have something squared equals b. All right, so look at what I have in the parentheses. Before I took the square root, I had x minus 1 squared, and on this side, I had -3. So that is what Delta Math is going to be looking for for that intermediate step in the middle.